So this is section 1.6, and okay, so just to recap. We have a ledger. On the left hand side of the ledger are statements or the set of statements, and on the right hand side is a set of facts. All right. Okay, a statement that is true is made true by a fact. So there is a correspondence between each statement on the left hand side and a fact on the right hand side. So a fact is what makes a statement true. So a fact is known as a truth maker. To be even more precise, a fact is known, aka known to be a state of affair that obtains, that makes a proposition or a statement true. Okay, so a fact is a truth maker. All right, it is what makes a statement true or what makes a proposition true. So the author looked at this model and he basically labeled this to be AKA representationalism, right? This is known as representationalism, that there is representation between facts and statements, right? There's a correspondence between the two. But I guess the best way for me, or I guess for me to think about it is that for every statement on the left hand side, there's a there is a corresponding fact that makes that statement true. So for every true statement, there is a corresponding fact, and the fact is just a state of affair that obtained. So just by merely saying that a state of affair, it doesn't it is too general. Okay, a state of affair merely means it could obtain. It doesn't have to obtain. So we are talking about state of affair that obtain, that makes the statement on the left hand side true. So this is known as representationalism, according to the author. So according to the author in section 1.6, he is saying that representationalism goes by the board. It can be dispensed with, right? You can dispense this model of language and facts, or language and reality. Instead, the author advocate for global expressivism. And according to the author, global expressivism, which designated as GE, is a type of metaphysical quietism, right? Which is a kind of, I think it's kind of a metaphysical nominalism, or, but don't hold me to, um, yeah, yeah, you have to check this out. I don't quite understand this metaphysical quietism. So, but but I kind of think this is kind of like metaphysical nominalism. But anyways, then the author in section 1.6 also introduced the concept of Carnap's idea, right? The author considered Carnap's idea to be an ally of his own idea. According to his articulation of Carnap's idea, is that Carnap, according to the author, thinks that there is different linguistic frameworks. Okay, so there could be a moral framework, right? There could be a scientific framework. There could be an aesthetic framework, and the author called this framework pluralism. And these different frameworks are really languages, or different ways of describing or understanding our language use. So there are different framework for language. So you can have a language for morals. You have a language for scientific. You have a language for aesthetic. And the author kind of used the metaphor of fence, that these languages are kind of fenced in, right? That these boundaries are like fences, and basically you're carving language into these different, subsets of language, right? And together forms what language is, right? Just like there's a moral language, there's a scientific language, there's an aesthetic language, and that there are fences around these languages, right? And the author talks about existential qualifiers for different frameworks. So I think maybe linguistic pluralism or uh, pluralism is kind of like, okay, so there are these linguistic framework, there are these different languages. This is kind of my representation of Carnap's linguistic pluralism, right? Within each of these languages, there are fence that 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 is the border of these languages, and within these languages there is existential qualifiers, right? There is exist elements, right? You can say elements of language, of the moralistic language. There's elements of aesthetic languages, of scientific languages, etc., etc. Okay. So according to Carnap, so these different framework pluralism is really grounded in functional pluralism. So you might ask, like, why is there these different type of framework? There's more framework, scientific framework, aesthetic framework. Like, what is the origin of these different frameworks? And I think Carnap is arguing that is really grounded in the use of these language. It's grounded in functions, the purpose that they serve within the linguistic community. Okay. So functional so Carnap advocates for something called a functional pluralism, that there are the reason why there are different linguistic frameworks, or scientific framework, aesthetic framework, is that there are different they serve different functions in human society. And then the author introduced Quine's idea, which is which is serves to be kind of a challenger to Carnap's idea, right? Quine's Quine is pretty much made famous by his analytic synthetic distinction, namely his abolishment of the analytic synthetic distinction. According to the author, this leads to the breakdown of these fences. So, we call that, okay, so there are these languages separated by fences. These fences are the boundary borders. The analytic synthetic distinction is served as a breakdown of these fences. And that what ends up happening is that, okay, you have fences that are served to be the borders that separate the different type of linguistic frameworks. But when you break through these fences, well, you only have one single language. So Quine is advocating for something called like a monofunctional language, or a mono language. Instead of linguistic pluralism, he's advocating that there is only one language. So in the Carnap's field, each language there exists a qualifier for each of these different frameworks. But in the Quinean view, there is only one fence, and that's the fence that separate language from non-language. And the existential qualifier is about elements of this language within this gigantic fence that we call language. So Quine is advocating for a functional language. It is interesting is that the author also say that Quine maybe fundamentally is more of an ally of his own view, because Quine also have a deflationary view of truth and reference. This is something that that is debatable, but because, like, yeah, he thinks that Quine is an ally because Quine doesn't think truth and reference are real, and that he takes a deflationary view where there is no truth or there is no reference. But I don't know how true is that, or yeah. So one way I'm thinking about is that, okay, so you see that in Carnap's idea, there are all these different existential qualifier, right? And each of these existential qualifier is, is really describing its own linguistic framework. So you can have linguistic framework, existential qualifiers representing by, you know, uh, these different existential qualifier with different gamma 1, gamma 2, gamma 3, etc. But notice that all of these gamma 1, gamma 2 to all the way to gamma n are really conditions, right? Are really conditions. That means that for any existential qualifier for a certain condition, gamma I, right, you can really just represent as the existential qualifier, as one universal existential qualifier, given that a certain condition is true. So I am inclined to think that, Carnap's idea that there are different linguistic framework, and that in each framework there's an existential qualifier, ultimately reduced to there being one single language. So I am more sympathetic to Quine's idea that of this, monofunctional language, or yeah, that there is only one existential qualifier rather than multiple existential qualifier, because for each unique different linguistic qualifier, right, you could represent it as one single existential qualifier, the universal one, right? So I am more sympathetic toward the Quinean view. So Quine seemed to be right about the existential qualifier, but I do think that Carnot seems to be right when it comes to different linguistic framework assumptions, that these gamma 1s to gamma n, they serve to represent different ways of talking about things, right? I think that it is insightful that Carnot points us to the idea that there are these moralistic language, there are these scientific way of describing things, there are these more ways of describing beauty, like aesthetic frameworks, and these, we should consider them to be different ways of talking about different subjects, right? So basically different conditions. And I think it's great that Carnap, point out that we do have different standards when we talk about these different domains, right? But but I'm with Quine that we only need one single existential qualifier, whereas I agree with Carnap that, it is important to recognize that when we talk about different domains like aesthetics or morals or scientific context, we are using a particular type of language with certain embedded assumptions like these gamma i's.